Okay, so the title of the talk I hope is fairly clear. When I was looking into this, I came across an article an interview actually by David Steele in the Guardian newspaper from 2007, and David Steele, who's the architect of abortion law in Britain, said that the Catholic Church was contributing to the use of abortion by their opposition to contraception. So I thought, well, there you have it. If you want somebody to blame for 200,000 children being killed every year, turn not to the architect of the abortion law himself, but turn to the Roman Catholic Church. It seemed to me that there must be something a little bit dubious about that kind of reasoning when you have an organisation which is obviously clearly opposed to abortion is actually taking the rap for it. It seemed to me something similar like sort of blaming Amnesty International for sort of imprisonment of prisoners of conscience, because you could sort of argue something like, well, Amnesty International, they promote free speech, and if people freely speak, then of course tyrants have to crush them and take them into prison. And it seems that even somebody who has a sort of pro-choice attitude to life must think there's something a bit funny with David Steele's reasoning there, that the Catholic Church, because of its opposition to contraception, is actually the cause of abortion in this country. But it may be possible, on the other hand, is it possible? Just think of that. Is it possible to mount an argument in favour of him? Of course, his point is probably something like this, that if we could contracept everybody up to the eyeballs, then nobody would get pregnant and then there would be no abortions. So my talk, I wanted to sort of think through this for the next maybe 40 minutes, this issue. I mean, what's going on here? We have abortion, something that as pro-lifers we clearly stand against. And then we have another issue, another reality in our society, namely contraception. And there's obviously some relationship between these two. And David Steele is forming it in a certain way to say that contraception is really the solution to abortion. So what should our attitude be as pro-lifers? Should we be against contraception? Or should we be, as David Steele is suggesting, in favour of contraception? Or should we be kind of agnostic? Sit on the fence, yeah? So let's see, that's my idea. I wanted to think through this. In fact, I wanted to think through it myself, and what I'm going to say to you in part is my thoughts over the last month since I knew I was going to give the talk, and I've been preparing for it. What actually is this connection? Now, I'm going to start with some facts, because modern people always like facts, and I take you to be modern people. And then we'll move to some ideas. Ideas are always more important than facts, but we have to get the facts out of the way. So if we start out with a fact that seems to support actually David Steele's position, it's sort of out of deference to fairness, go for the strongest possible facts for our opponents. Yeah? It's always a good way of arguing. See what your opponent's position is. The Linacre Institute, which seems to me the most incredibly badly named organisation in the world, because they don't do any good at all, as far as I can see. You need to know a bit of German to get that one right. They are a wing of Planned Parenthood. They're a kind of research arm. And if you go on their website, for example, you'll see some sort of academic articles there. One of them, in regards to this question, is focusing on Russia. And they really promote Russia as an instance. And in Russia, you do have a situation where, during the communist times, there wasn't as prevalent a use of modern contraception as there is in Western Europe. After the fall of communism 25 years ago, then more and more modern forms of contraception were taken on in Russia. And there you have a situation where, during the communist times, abortion peaked at 165 abortions per 1,000 women. And afterwards, it fell to 42 per 1,000. Now, to get a handle on that, the rate in the UK is about 20. So it went from 8 times the level of abortion in the UK to about double. This article is trying to make the point that contraception seems to be have contributed to this. Now, we have to be careful because, of course, we don't know the use of abortifacient contraception in that case. So that makes our trust in the statistics a little bit less sure. But I would be happy to say, okay, in those situations where you've got absolutely mind-boggling rates of abortion, 8 times what we're experiencing in the UK, you could clip some of that excesses by very, very vigorous programs of modern contraception. But bottom line there is that Russia is really, really an anomaly there. I mean, it's a culture which had no opposition to abortion because all opposition to anything was more or less crushed in that country. And culturally, simply, abortion was the form of birth control. So you've got really an abnormal situation. If you look at other places where they've really targeted research on the question of the connection between contraception and abortion, and not just taken contraception statistics and abortion statistics and tried to meld them, you get a different picture. So Spain, for example, there was a study from 1997 to 2007, and there it was very clear that as contraception use increased over that period by 30%, abortions went up by 50%. So there you have a hand-in-hand increase in the use of contraception and the prevalence of abortion. And you have a similar situation in the UK or in Great Britain. Contraception use since 1970 has increased among unmarried women absolutely drastically to saturation point. And we also see, of course, over the period 1970s, 1990 at least, a very clear linear increase in abortion. So again, hand in hand, contraception use goes up, abortions increase. Another study, similar results in Turkey, which was another focus study. The abortion and contraception laws were liberalized at the same time in Turkey in '83. And there we see an initial increase in both use of contraception and a parallel increase in abortion. Until we get to the level of total saturation use of contraception, there's always going to be women in any society who won't use contraception, but it kind of saturates at, say, 85%. And then actually the abortions dipped and plateaued, but they stayed at a level much higher than they initially were at. That's important. Okay, so, you know, I was looking at this and I thought, wow, all these data, all these statistics, the different patterns in the different cultures, what sort of, from just the facts, what kind of conclusion could we draw? And I would conclude like this. The hand-in-hand increase in use of contraception and then abortion seems to reflect the fact that contraception changes or is important in the change in cultural attitudes towards sex and babies. So this was very clear in the case of Turkey. The researchers pulled this out, this point out, and it seems very clear that contraception leads to a mentality of more sex, meaning extramarital sex as a norm, no babies or less babies, smaller families. And when you get that dynamic, when you get a dynamic of more sex but people not wanting babies, then of course you get an increase in unwanted pregnancies, which are then terminated in abortions. So that seems to be the underlying social dynamic that's going on in both the Spain case, the UK case, and the Turkey case. Now, as I said, I would accept, if I was in an argument with somebody about this, I would accept in very extreme cases, like the Russian case, contraception, maybe it really does clip excesses. But the other situations of the Spanish, the British, and the instance of Turkey seem to show that while that might be possible to clip some excesses, contraception is basically ingraining and entrenching an attitude which is going to be pro-abortion. And we see this in the Turkey case because even though the parallel increase, there then becomes a dip in the abortions plateau out at 40% higher than what they started at. Yeah, so we have a net increase of 40% in abortions, even once we've reached saturation point in the use of contraception. So can contraception, is it a panacea for abortion? As David Steele seems to suggest, I would say utterly no. It's going to ingrain and entrench abortion into society, and it's going to do it by bringing about cultural change. This is going to be one of the key points I want to bring out. Contraception brings about a cultural revolution in societies, and it's on account of that it's actually promotive of abortion and in no way the solution. Okay, so basically I could summarize conclusions to that introduction like this, that I'm going to go not with a British politician, never go with a British politician, British statesman, but I'm going to go with the Polish Pope, because in Evangelium Vitae, we read very clearly, when John Paul II touches upon this question of the relationship of abortion and contraception, he says this: despite their differences of nature and moral gravity, contraception and abortion are often closely connected as fruits of the same tree. Let me read that again. Despite their differences of nature and moral gravity, contraception and abortion are often closely connected as fruits of the same tree. This seems to summarize what I would pick out of that factual information which I presented you, and that's what I want to now focus on. Now, I am opposed to contraception as simply something evil, morally evil and wrong. But in this talk, I'm not going to say contraception is not the solution for abortion because it's morally wrong, though it is. I'm going to say because it's practically not the solution to abortion. Now, we do have to often talk about substantive issues, and so in a bigger discussion about contraception, we would have to talk about its substantive moral evil. But I'm not saying it's an immoral solution to the problem of abortion. I'm saying it's no solution, even at a practical level. Yeah? But I'm slightly bracketing the question of its morality at the moment because, as you'll see, it's not the thrust of what I need to say to you. And my main thesis would be this, put this way, that contraception is a game changer in any culture. Now, that word is kind of slightly new, so I thought, well, I'll kind of have a look at what it says in the Oxford Dictionary about game changer. And according to the Oxford Dictionary, a game changer is an event, an idea, or a procedure that affects a significant shift in the current way of doing or thinking about something. So whatever a game changer is, it's an event, idea, procedure, that does what? It affects a significant shift in either the way we think or the way we do something. And my argument is that contraception is a game changer because it affects a great change and a significant change in the way that we think about certain realities. Yeah? I was also fiddling around on the internet when I was preparing for this talk, and I came across various sites which were things like 10 inventions which changed our world, or 15 inventions that changed our world. And if you look up those lists, you'll always get things like the wheel, you get the compass, the printing press, what else was in there? Penicillin is in there, and you get the contraceptive pill. Okay? So even at a secular level, people recognize that the pill somehow is one of the 10 great inventions which changed our world. So there is a kind of acceptance that it's a game changer. Now, how they would explain its importance would probably be something like it gave women power over their body, it's important for women's liberation, or something like that, okay? But I want to focus on something else here. I want to focus on 5 areas in which contraception is a game changer because it changes thinking about these 5 important areas of reality. And if I think I can explain that to you, I feel I've done my job in showing you why contraception is such a significant issue when it comes to building a culture of life or combating a culture of death. Because contraception changes the way we think about sex, the way we think about sex, the way we think about life, about the human person, about science, and about morality. Okay? So I'm going to explain that in that order. Contraception changes the way we think about sex, life, person, science, and morality. Any change in any of those could have a significant impact in regards to the promotion of the culture of death. When they come together, they really are rather devastating. Okay? But that's my plan. I hope you're with me. At least we know where we're going. I'm going to go through those 5 areas and show how contraception is a game changer in each of those, meaning changes our way of seeing things. Okay? Good? Plan okay with you? It's the only one I've got, so you better stick with it. Okay, so the first thing is it changes our view of sex. I kind of already mentioned this a little bit in the analysis of the facts, but contraception trivializes sex. Why? Because it takes out the profound element from sex, namely procreation. Now, once that element is not seen as connected in any way with sex, then sex becomes a trivial pastime. It becomes a bit like playing sort of doubles tennis. You know, it's a bit of fun and it doesn't really matter who your partner is. But if that is the mentality, which it is the modern mentality in most of the Western world, and it's brought about by contraception, then people will engage in that activity, namely sexual intercourse, with persons that they would in no way want to raise a child with. Yeah? When you decide who you're going to raise a child with, you are very, very careful about that person and how you interact with that person. But the trivialization of sex means that lots of people are having intercourse, and a portion of those are conceiving children, with persons they have no intention to raise a child with. They don't want to raise children with those persons. And so, of course, what happens is we have more people having children, become pregnant with people they're not going to raise children with, and they solve this problem through abortion. So in that way, contraception acts a little bit according to the dynamic of the so-called Peltzman effect. There's a kind of fairly recognized effect called the Peltzman effect. Sam Peltzman was an economist somewhere in America, and he came up with the idea, which I'm not sure is totally right, but the general principle is good, that in road safety, that actually having road safety mechanisms like seat belts and sort of crash bars and air cushions, it didn't actually cut the number of deaths on the road, because it made people more risky in the way they drive, increased their sort of lowered their threshold of risk. Now, I don't think it works with cars, but it does work with ski helmets. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't wear a ski helmet when you go skiing. My kids go skiing a lot because we live in Austria. They wear ski helmets. Okay? But it does seem to work with ski helmets. Actually, people with ski helmets have higher levels of critical accidents in skiing than those who don't wear ski helmets. Because once they put their ski helmet on, of course, they think they're Mr. Incredible, and they go flying down things they can't cope with, and they have accidents. There's a similar dynamic between contraception and sex. Yeah? People have more risky sex, meaning sex with people they're not prepared to raise children with, because they feel safe, falsely, because of contraception. And there was a report a few years ago by Yale University, Yale, so we should pay attention to them, that's a very important university. Well, they looked into this question at the level of teenage pregnancy, and the Peltzman effect definitely works at the level of teenage pregnancy. They came up with these conclusions. They studied various projects which had really targeted teenagers with contraception to try and reduce teenage pregnancy, which to a large extent ended in abortion. And they reported this. They said, our results suggest that increasing access to contraception may actually increase long-run pregnancy rates, even when short-run pregnancy rates fall. On the other hand, policies that decrease access to contraception, and hence sexual activity, may lower pregnancy rates in the long run. And they concluded the reason was, should contraception become more available, those who switch from unprotected sex to protected sex will lower the teenage pregnancy rate, while those who move from abstaining to protected sex will increase the teenage pregnancy rate due to contraception failure. So, I mean, the dynamic here is that it just simply draws more people into the uncommitted sex market. So it may be people are already brought into that way of life, they use condoms and they get pregnant less often. But the whole dynamic of contraception in the culture at the level of teenage just draws people more into the uncommitted sex market, and therefore you have more people engaging in that kind of activity, and therefore more pregnancies which are going to be terminated. So it seems to me it's like, so trusting contraception to reduce abortion is a little bit like trusting the Chancellor of the Exchequer to make you rich. Yeah? I mean, at the budget time, okay, he slashes taxes on one side, but you can bet he raises them somewhere else to get the money back. Yeah? And this is what contraception is doing. It's kind of giving with one hand and taking back with the other. And as the Yale University report indicates, the net result is higher levels of teenage pregnancy, not lower levels. Yeah? Okay, so that was all according to the first game-changing aspect, which is the idea that it changes our thinking about sex. And this has a negative knock-on effect for something like abortion. The second is it's changing our view of life. Now, I don't know why, again, when I was working on this, a song popped into my head which shouldn't be there from a long time back. And it comes from the Monty Python film, The Meaning of Life, which I do not, N-O-T, recommend anybody to watch, okay? Not. But in there's a scene of a Catholic dad, and he's in a ghetto, and the ghetto is like kid infested. There's kids pouring out of every window, and they're all his kids. There's hundreds of them, and he sings a song where the refrain goes something like this. He goes, "Every sperm is sacred, every sperm is great. When one sperm is wasted, God gets quite irate." And this is the refrain, and the whole thing is poking fun at Catholics for having too many kids and not using contraception. Now, there's something true about that song, and there's something not true about that song. So let's go with the not true to start with. It's not true because it's actually warping the teaching about contraception, because it's saying that the sperm is sacred and somehow equating it with a human who's sacred. Yeah, and we're not saying that contraception is identical to abortion. Abortion is a form of murder. Yeah, it's against the virtue of justice. Use of contraception is against the virtue of chastity. So there is a difference between the two, and that's clear even in the Evangelium Vitae quote. If I just read that again, JP2 makes that very clear, because he says, despite their difference of nature and moral gravity, contraception and abortion are often closely connected. So he's clear about that, yeah? They're not the same reality. One is more grave than the other, and they're different in nature. So we're not saying that contraception is a form of murder, killing of an innocent child, as we would with abortion. However, there is some truth hidden in that little ditty. And the truth is this, that contraception enculturates an anti-life mentality. It is indicative of a culture which doesn't think human life is necessarily a good thing. Yeah? And when a culture has taken on that mentality, then abortion, the doors to abortion have been unbarred. It's a little bit like sort of telling a child that, pneumonia is really bad for you, and you have to take protection against pneumonia. When you go outside to play, put your woolly hat on, etc., etc., etc. And then in their fun of playing outside, the protection gets knocked off their head, and they catch pneumonia. And then you say to them, "Well, you've got pneumonia now, but we're not going to give you any antibiotics." Yeah? This, of course, is just, there's no connection between those two. If you tell someone pneumonia is wrong, bad thing, then you protect against it, and if it comes, you kill it. So it's the same with contraception. Contraception enculturates us that human life is a bad thing, pregnancy is normally a disaster, or for many people a disaster. You protect against it, and when it comes along, you kill it. Yeah? The mentality is just deep in the notion of contraception, and that's why countries which permit contraception legally permit abortion very, very quickly. In the UK, the difference between the time difference between the provision of contraceptive pill on the NHS and the abortion law is about 7 years. Similar thing in the US. The laws permitting the sale of contraception and abortion laws are about 7 years apart. And I didn't go through all the countries. I'd be interested to see this. Now, Ireland lasted 32 years between permitting contraception and abortion, but I think that's only because they had an escape valve that they could send their ladies over to England for abortions. Yeah? But one follows the other as day follows night, because the mentality is deep in there. Now, the anti-life mentality in contraception and its spillover into abortion is obviously concretely, you might say pharmaceutically clear in the morning after pill. Because there you have a pill where the culture isn't even interested in the distinction between contraception and abortion, because the contraceptive anti-life mentality has already seeped into an abortifacient mentality. And the next thing, of course, which is coming along the line, at least maybe Dr. Watt could tell me that it really is coming up, but I mean, vaccines against pregnancy, which are not against pregnancy, vaccines against carrying children. So they're developing vaccines, you get vaccinated so that the hormones produced by the child needed to sustain the pregnancy are actually destroyed by your immune system. And therefore you will basically, as long as you have that vaccine, you will basically miscarry all your children. So no distinction is made there between the contraceptive anti-life mentality and abortion. It's already spilt over. Okay, so game changer. It's changed the meaning of sex, and it changes our attitude towards life. Both of these have profoundly negative consequences for abortion. Third, it changes our view of the human person. A lot could be said here. I'm just going to tell you one story which I think makes part of the point I would want to make. A friend of mine told me a story a couple of years ago. His son went into school one day and they had just conceived their 6th or 5th child. I can't remember, 5th or 6th child, let's say 5th. And his son was really excited. There was a new baby coming into the house, and he went off to school and he told his friends at school. And his friends were also very excited, because kids love kids, and there's no problem with the level of that. You don't want to get that off. So his playmates were really happy about this and excited, and one of the playmates went back to the mum, his own mum, and said, Dante, he's got a new baby in the family. Couldn't we have a new baby in our family? And the mum said to him, and this was reported back through the chain to the son, to my friend, and then to me, that the mother had said, no, we can't, because mummy's had one of those operations that you give rabbits so that we can't breathe anymore. Okay? Now, actually, that's a pretty honest way of expressing what's going on there. That mum had one of those operations you give rabbits. And what's going on here is contraception. We are treating humans as if they are no different from animals. In sexual matters, humans are able to control themselves, and that is a sign of their rationality. My in-laws live on a sort of small farm, and as far as I can see, the animals don't have this possibility of constraining themselves or developing virtue in matters of sexuality. Yeah, the chickens are right. Okay, so the point is that if you go into a school and you say to the girls there, look, girls, here's a pill, just take it, it'll sort you out. You treat them like animals. You are saying you are not capable of controlling yourself. Virtue is not a possibility for you. But to say that is to say you are not rational. You're irrational. You're just like an animal. So contraception is not the only element, but it's one of the elements in society which start to blur the distinction between humans and animals, or at least level it out. And once you've done that, then all sorts of other elements of the culture of death become much more logical to a society. Now, when Fido gets run over by the car because he escaped again and run onto the road, and he's very, very, he's in pain, he's very sick, you put him down. But do you want to apply the same logic to Granny when she gets sick and can't move around anymore? Well, you're more likely to if you live in a culture which can't see the distinction between humans and animals. And I'm not saying contraception is the only thing which levels out, but it is an important element in the leveling out. Because it just takes away any need, any motivation, any possibility of developing virtue and reason in the use of your sexuality. Okay, so changes our view of sex, changes our view of life, changes our view of the human person in making us seem more like the animals. And then artificial procreative techniques, selection, these type of things just seem more plausible to a culture which is brought into that. Okay, the fourth one. Contraception changes our view of science. Now, C.S. Lewis, he was very interested in the similarity between and the difference between magic and science. You see this in two of his works. I think C.S. Lewis, because he wrote a lot, I don't know if you know, he wrote a lot of philosophical works, as well as writing kind of nice stories for kids, He wrote a lot of philosophical works. And his ideas that he develops in philosophy, they seem to always crop up in his kids' books. You can see this several times. If you know Narnia, for example, well, and his science fiction novels, and you know his philosophy, you'll see the overlap here. And this interest in the similarity and difference between science and magic appears in one of his philosophical works, The Abolition of Man. It's definitely a book everybody should read in their life, and it's mercifully short, like all good books. And it appears in The Magician's Nephew. Now, the similarity between magic and science, according to Lewis, is that they both are seeking, the goal of both of them is to gain power over nature. And actually, he points out that magic came to prominence in the Western culture, was much more prominent during the birth of science than it was in the Middle Ages and the Dark Ages. Middle Ages and Dark Ages, we think that this is the era of the realm of magic, where magic was popular. He says magic, into alchemy particularly, were very prominent in esoteric movements just at the time of the birth of science, so it's on the 17th and 18th century. Yeah? And he sees them as basically twins. Why? Because they both have the goal of gaining power over nature. Now the difference is this, that magic, at least traditionally, magic has not been interested whether the power is good or bad. Whether the power you gain is really benefiting human beings or not. It's pure power that you're after. Whereas he says science, at least until recent times, is interested in whether the power gained is really for the good of humankind or not. So science is interested in the questions of the good and the true as well as gaining power. Magic is only interested in gaining power. Now, there's a great quote in, I think I got down here, in The Magician's Nephew. I don't know anyone know The Magician's Nephew, the book? Yeah? I've got my fingers crossed they're never going to make a film about that, so they won't ruin it like the other ones. But anyway, I think it's definitely the best, in my opinion, it's the best of the Narnia Chronicle books. And there's a great scene in there where Uncle Andrew, who's the reason that the two kids, Diggory and Polly, get sent into sort of the other worlds because they put rings on, which make them kind of disappear. It's a bit like Tolkien there, but Uncle Andrew is a rather sinister character, and he's the one, the magician, who's basically worked out how to get this power to transport people into other worlds. And he describes to Diggory, who's his nephew, I think, how he got that power, and he got it through deception. He lied and deceived a certain woman he knew, and he's justifying himself about the power he's now gained. And he says to Diggory, he says, of course, he says, you must understand that rules of that sort, about lying and whatnot, however excellent they may be for little boys, for servants and for women, and even people in general, can't possibly be expected to apply to profound students and great thinkers and sages. No, Diggory, men like me who possess hidden wisdom are freed from the common rules, just as we are cut off from the common pleasures, as my boys are high and lowly destinies. Now the point there is that Uncle Andrew, as a magician, is not interested in morality. He's interested in getting power. And what Lewis points out in Abolition of Man is that the world of magic and the world of science, which diverged happily at their inception, are now coming back together in the sense of science is increasingly no longer interested in whether the power it achieves is good and does conform to the truth. It becomes amoral, and therefore it becomes more like magic in its essence. It's a subtle point, but it is rather profound point I think Lewis is making there. And when he gives an example in The Abolition of Man of an element of scientific progress which is no longer interested in whether it's really good for mankind or not, hence it's more like the dynamics of magic, guess what he points to? He points to contraception. Okay, this is Lewis in The Abolition of Man. Now, I think you can see this problem, and I'm going to apply it in a minute to the question of abortion. This problem, if you look at, again, my list I saw of the 10 great things which changed the world, 2 of them from the 20th century, which are right next to each other because they're chronologically invented within 10 years of each other, are penicillin and contraceptive pill. So they are only 10 years apart they were invented. And according to this list, they are of the same type, but actually if you look closer, they are not of the same type. Because penicillin really is a power over nature for the restoration of human health, and therefore it respects the goal of science to gain power over nature for the good of man. The contraceptive pill is to neuter a healthy generative power in a human being. Therefore, it disrespects the goal of science to gain power over nature according to what is good for man. Yeah? So penicillin and contraceptive pill are in a way utterly opposed to each other in their rationale. And that's why Lewis was sensitive to these issues. He actually gave that example of contraception as something a bit more like magic. It's just power for the sake of power. Put aside the question of whether this is really good for human beings or not. Now, once you get into that mentality, which was, again, Pope Benedict was very sensitive to this, he called it scientism. This is science self-justifying itself. Whatever is possible is moral. That's the bottom line of scientism. Whatever is possible is moral. That's why it's like magic, according to Lewis. Then, of course, the whole gamut of possibilities opens up. This is why we have embryo experimentation. We have destructive fertility treatments, in addition to abortion. It's because it is possible, it self-justifies, it's moral. Yeah? But it's rooted in part in an attitude towards contraception. This is the point. Contraception is a technology which is not promotive of the human good, which has been generally accepted, and it's contributed to the corruption of what we think science is for. Science becomes an amoral reality. Okay, so what do we got? Changes our view of sex, changes our view of life, changes our view of the human person, changes our view of science. Last one, don't panic, we're coming into land, sort of. Contraception changes our view of morality. Okay, now I want to say something very brief, and then, which is a kind of, I think, important to understand, and then I'll come to the main point. Contraception in the Catholic Church and in Catholic moral theology is the core issue which has corrupted an understanding of moral absolutes. This is absolutely clear. John Finnis, who is a philosopher at Oxford University, in his book on moral absolutes, makes this very clear that in Catholic moral thinking, this is not good moral thinking, but bad moral thinking, moral absolutes were destroyed or corrupted through the question of contraception. That issue came in as something that people just didn't see correctly. They had a consequentialist view of reality. They just said, okay, we're going to judge morality on the basis of which consequences are the best. We don't care whether we have to use bad means to reach them. What matters is the consequences. Such a kind of way of thinking destroys moral absolutes. And the kind of soft underbelly of moral absolutes in the Catholic moral teaching that you get in universities and Catholic colleges was contraception. Now, why that's important is because the Catholic Church is really the only organisation left in this world that as a unit can stand up against the culture of death. So a corruption there is a real corruption. Now, I'm not talking about the official teaching of the Catholic Church here. I'm talking about the way that moral theology is often taught. There no longer is holding to moral absolutes that abortion is wrong, that euthanasia is wrong, that adultery is wrong. Now, that wouldn't have been tolerable 50 years ago. The reason it's now tolerably taught in many colleges is precisely because of the desire to justify contraception. It's the easy topic, it's the soft underbelly, and the others fall because of that. Okay, so that's more to do with, anyway, the question of how morality is taught in Catholic institutes. The more fundamental thing I want to say is this. Contraception changes our view of morality according to what I'm going to call the Gollum effect. Now, it seems to me, if you take Gollum, Gollum, the figure from The Lord of the Rings, something rather interesting is going on there. His utter covetousness for the ring of power, his utter obsession with it, leads to two fundamental moral corruptions in him. First of all, it leads to an act of gross injustice because he murders his friends to get the ring. You know the story? He's with his hobbit friend Deagle, when in those days he's called Schmeagol, and Deagle gets the ring, and Gollum wants it so much he murders him for it. And it also leads to his insanity. Yeah? So the point here is deep covetousness in Gollum leads to two effects: injustice and an inability to see reality as it really is. That's what insanity is. Now, Tolkien was utterly committed to a certain metaphysical view of the world. Yeah. So if you read the Silmarillion, which is another one of his works, it gives you the metaphysical background to everything he writes in The Lord of the Rings. And by pointing this reality out in Gollum, covetous leading to injustice and insanity, Tolkien is touching upon what's traditionally called the connection of the virtues, connection of the cardinal virtues. Okay, so hang in with me here, because this is the most philosophical part of the talk. We'll be over in a couple of minutes and we can relax. The moral tradition makes this very clear that you cannot have any of the cardinal virtues without having the others. So we have prudence, justice, fortitude, and temperance. They hang together. If you are corrupted in one, you are corrupted in the others. If you grow in one, you grow in the others. Yeah? So the point is, with Gollum, intemperance, his covetousness, intemperance, leads him to be unjust. And it leads him to be imprudent. That is Tolkien showing that there is a connection between the virtue of temperance and the virtue of justice and the virtue of prudence. And as Gollum is corrupted in his temperance, he becomes covetous. He's corrupted, he becomes unjust, and he becomes imprudent. He can't see reality straight. With me? Okay, now the reason I get into all this is precisely this. Contraception brings, not on its own, but it's a very important factor, intemperance into cultures, and especially into the sexual life of individuals. That since we are fallen creatures, the default attitude of our sexuality is selfish. Anybody who doesn't agree with me on that, I think either never had sex or they got the virtue of the Blessed Virgin Mary. Because but we see it all over. You see it all over the place, yeah? You see it all over the place that sexual matters are a major factor of selfishness in our lives and in the lives of those we live amongst. You've got to do something about that. It's the default position. Contraception removes all the motivation to do anything about that. Yeah? So it builds into persons' lives, married persons as well, sexual selfishness. In fact, John Paul II's objection to contraception is not so much it's anti-life, but it's anti-love. Because it doesn't allow a training in sexual selflessness. And if you don't make that training, the default position is selfishness in your sexual lives. Okay, now, how do we make this connection between justice and prudence? Something like this. If you encourage in your culture selfishness in sexual relationships between persons, why on earth do you imagine they are going to be selfless when they conceive children? You set them up to be selfish in their sexual intercourse. You set them up to be selfish with the fruits of sexual intercourse. You set them up to be unjust in these matters. Namely, just as Gollum kills his friend to get the ring, covetousness leads to murder. It's a similar dynamic with contraception and abortion. You build selfishness into people's sexual lives, you set them up for very unjust actions vis-a-vis the children they conceive. Yeah? But Gollum was also, through his covetousness, he went insane. He couldn't see reality clearly enough. And St. Thomas Aquinas is my master, should I say, theologically. He makes this very clear. The main reason for imprudent actions in our life, and imprudence is not seeing reality as it really is covetousness. It's intemperance. Why? Because if you want to see the world as it really is, you've got to stop putting yourself at the center. Yeah? The covetous, intemperate person puts themselves at the center of this world, and that's just not true. You cannot see reality clearly if you think that you are at the center of reality. Yeah? And then you make imprudent decisions because your whole view of reality is wrong. And this is the reason that why in cultures that are unchaste, that are impure, and contraception is a major element of that, they simply cannot see what is utterly clear to pure and chaste persons. Namely, the humanity of the unborn child. It is utterly clear. It's just not, it's almost so clear that you cannot mount an argument for it. Now, you can be trained in mount arguments, but for somebody who is pure, they simply see that to be true, that the child in the womb is a human being. And to be asked to justify that fact is like to be asked to justify, why the sun rises every morning. I mean, it's just the fact, just the way things are. But in unchaste cultures, they cannot see reality clearly, like Gollum couldn't see reality clearly because of his intemperance. Yeah? So if we don't deal with that at some level, then we can't hope for a culture that can see reality clearly. I'll give you another example. If you want to see beauty, you have to have chastity. Because beauty is to appreciate something for its own sake, not to want to consume it and have it. If you build into people's lives and into their sexual lives having and possession and taking, which are the elements of unchastity, how can you expect them to see beauty? And therefore they cannot see the beauty of unborn life. It's just not evident to them. And so you end up feeling like you're in completely different worlds, and you are, but it's to do with your purity of vision. Finally, I mean, we even know that Jesus himself says, "Blessed are the pure in heart, they shall see God." Making this connection. The ability to see reality clearly depends on a certain inner purity. Yeah? So to see God and to see his image in everybody, including the unborn child, requires a purity which is being compromised by a contraceptive culture. But note, I'm only taking contraception there as one element, a very important element of an unchaste culture, an impure culture. There are other elements, the use of pornography, the propagation of lurid music, immodest ways of dressing and behaving. To my mind, these are also utterly contrary to a culture of life and promotive of a culture of death, precisely because, like contraception, they make us not see reality clearly. And therefore, we don't make good judgments about human life. Okay, so let's conclude. What have I been saying? I've been trying to show that contraception is a game changer. It changes views of very, very fundamental realities in society, which cannot but have a very negative knock-on effect for life issues like abortion, but including euthanasia, embryo experimentation, and other elements. I concentrated very much, you might say, on the psychological effect of contraception, how it changes their mind. There are other elements. Let me just give you two very briefly so you see that this isn't the whole business to be discussed, but I can only pick a certain area of the topic. Contraception and abortion are often legally connected. You see it's very clear in the US. The laws that permitted contraception are precisely the laws which permitted abortion. So there's sometimes legal connections. There's demographic connections. If you contracept your culture out of existence, you end up with a very, very disproportionate number of old people, small number of young people. They can't look after the old people, and so you promote euthanasia. So you've got legal issues, you've got demographic issues. There may be other connections that we could bring up and you could think of. But I felt it more important to concentrate on the psychological connection because I think it goes deeper, it's more subtle, and it's more longer lasting. And I would summarize it by saying it changes the way we think. Maybe you could just put it like this, that a pill, an LSD tablet, changes your view of reality for one night, apparently. But the contraceptive pill is changing the view of reality for the whole of generations and for the whole of cultures. Yeah? They're not seeing things as their forefathers saw things, and therefore they're going to be naturally ordered towards a culture of death. I would, in fact, though I have promoted the ideas and the great ideas of John Paul II, I would actually disagree with him on one point. He said, despite their difference of nature and moral gravity, contraception and abortion are often closely connected as fruits of the same tree. I wouldn't call them fruits of the same tree. I would relate them more as root to fruit. Contraception is the root of this problem, and abortion and other things are the fruits. And I don't believe that as pro-lifer we can settle for anything less than the utter eradication of abortion in our cultures. Yeah? Trimming excesses is not enough. We have to go for eradication. And I believe we will not get rid of this bad fruit in the garden of human society until we get rid of the tree, and we will not get rid of the tree until we lay the axe at its root. And this root is contraception. Thank you.